Hello my crafty friends. This video is a little different to my normal videos. It's going to be mostly in regular speed and it's going to be a step-by-step tutorial on how to make this canvas. Let's first talk about everything we're going to need to do this project. We're going to need something to work on. I have this small canvas. It's a mounted canvas, ready-made, and I have bought this from Kmart here in Australia, and I think it's roughly about $5 for a pack of 2. If you don't have this kind of canvas, you could also use watercolor paper, or if you have an art journal that you're working on, you can also do this project in your art journal. If you don't have any of these, you could also use just a piece of cardboard. Just a regular kind that you could cut out from a box, or this is a backing from some paper that I bought. Anything you really have that's a bit sturdy will work great for this project. You don't have to spend a lot of money. The next thing we need are some collage pieces. I have these that I've tried to keep to a theme. I've used natural neutral tones and some greens, and then I have some tissue paper, some stickers also, anything that I find and think will give a good background. Then some PVA glue or craft glue, white gesso, and some texture paste. We will also need some paint brushes and a palette knife. If you don't have a palette knife, you can also use an old credit card or a piece of cardboard. We're going to use this later for the texture paste. We're also going to add some detail which is optional with either correctional fluid or an acrylic pen or a Posco pen if you have. You don't have to add this. This is just little additional bits that we could add later. Some acrylic paints. I've just taken, again, natural tones and colors that match my paper. A little paint palette for mixing colors. A stencil if you have. We're going to add some texture paste through that to add some additional interest to the canvas, and then something for a focal point. I have this butterfly, which is a picture of an old calendar that I really like. It's a good size, it's got beautiful colors and will suit my theme. I'm going to use that as my focal point. You can look through magazines or any old art books that you have to find something. Of course, some water and a little bottle of water for spraying. So the one in the tub is for cleaning brushes, and then this is just for spraying to dilute some of the paints and to allow them to flow on the canvas. This project is going to work in layers. We're going to do different layers which will build up to the final product. To start off with, we're going to start by gluing down our collage pieces. I'm going to cover the entire canvas with different pieces of my collage, and I'm doing this using the craft glue or PVA glue and a paintbrush. I wouldn't recommend using a glue stick as I don't think it'll hold, especially if you're doing it onto a canvas. I don't believe the glue stick will be secure enough. When you're gluing down your collage pieces, there is no right and wrong. It's what you find appealing, and you just put the little bits wherever you want to put them. You can use a color theme like I have chosen, or you can just do random colors. For this, if you don't have cardstock, you could also cut out pieces from a magazine or old books. Anything really goes. Once I've glued it down, I do tend to put a layer of glue over the collage piece as well. This is to waterproof it slightly, so when I do add my paints, water and color, it doesn't become too soggy and it doesn't lose the integrity of the paper. Do try and relax and enjoy this process. Don't worry too much that the colors you're putting next to each other maybe don't match, or have you chosen the right pieces. It really all will work out in the end. It's no right and wrong, like I've said before, and it should be relaxing and enjoyable. So just glue it down. If you don't like something, you can just glue something over it. We will cover it with gesso later. You can easily make changes to these kind of projects, so try not to stress too much and really just enjoy it. I love listening to music while I work. I have a playlist that I sort of have created while I craft, and I tend to listen to that. You can also listen to a podcast. Just relax and enjoy the time. This is also a really great way to use up all the little pieces of paper or offcuts that you have that probably can't be used maybe in other projects, but you could use them up here, and you could actually make multiple of these and make them coordinating and hang them up on your wall or give them as gifts. The collage pieces you use don't have to be all the same size or all really small. Don't think like mosaic. It can be lots of little pieces if that's what you prefer. I tend to make some bigger areas and then some ones with smaller pieces, so there's more interest and more busyness in those areas. But I do try to mix it up between small pieces and larger pieces. Pieces like this that I've got a picture on, like these with the butterflies, are really good because although we're going to cover it with paint and gesso later, some of these images do shine through. I actually have a video where I explain why I put layers underneath my mixed media. A lot of people say to me, why are you putting all this down if you're just going to paint over it later? Which is a fair question, but I don't always cover everything with paint, and some of these bits you can see shining through the bottom, and I think they look really, really beautiful. I will link the video where I explain the difference between collaging and not collaging in art journaling, so you can see the difference too. I'll put the link to that video in the description below. Because we're using a wet glue, and depending on the thickness of your collage pieces, some of the papers may buckle slightly, and that's perfectly okay. I just think it adds to the texture and the overall look, and once we add the gesso, it'll make like even an uneven bits, so it will just be part of the final product. So don't worry too much about a little bit of buckles or little rough edges. It all adds to the charm. These that I'm adding now are actually stickers. I've had them for quite a while. I think I bought them off AliExpress, and I just like that they have the bold numbers and letters, which again, like I've said before, will shine through in certain parts. So I'm just adding a few of those. Some, yes, I'm adding upside down. I think not everything has to be straight and in line. Upside down, sideways, whatever you feel. But I really like how they add to this piece. Once you're done with all your collaging, make sure it dries well. The glue tends to dry pretty quickly, so maybe just leave it for an hour or two to air dry. I use my heat gun, and then once I'm finished drying, I've realized I just want to add something more in that corner. So I'm adding another small piece, and that's the art of this. You can just keep adding as you go. This would be considered our first layer. For our second layer, we're going to add some gesso. This is one of my favorite mediums to use. I use it in almost every project, and I have a few tubs of it. I really do love my gesso. And the reason we're going to add the gesso now is to soften this first layer that we've done. We could leave it like this, and that's fine too, but I want to tone everything down, and I want the edges to not be so harsh. So give it more of what I call like a misty look. So we're just going to add the gesso. I'm using a brush. You can also use your finger. And what I tend to do is I concentrate the majority of the gesso on the edges of each of the collage pieces, making those darker, and then lighter over the big areas. So it's not all just one flat layer of gesso. I do try to make it lighter and darker, concentrating the darker bits on the joins. If you feel that some of the gesso is a little too thick or too much, you can just take a baby wipe, and while the gesso is still wet, you can just gently wipe some away. I'm doing that here on these butterflies just to uncover them a little bit more and bring them more to the foreground. I would call this now layer 2, this layer with the gesso, and we're going to dry this really well. Using a small palette knife and my gesso again, I'm going to add some more gesso but in a different way. I'm going to scrape it on with the palette knife. In the introduction of this video, I did say if you don't have a palette knife, that is fine too. You can use an old credit card or even a piece of cardboard. It'll do the same thing. The reason I'm adding the gesso like this, even though we've already just finished adding gesso, it adds a different kind of texture because of the way it is applied with the palette knife. It gives it a bit of a sort of like a concretey type of feel. Although the color isn't a concrete color, it's like as if it's like a plastered wall. It's got that thicker and thinner bits, and I think it adds beautiful interest. If you can see there on the left where I've just added, it's big blobs of white and then the dark green shines from underneath, and I think that is very, very interesting and very pleasing to the eye. I was talking earlier about the paper rippling due to the glue. You can see at the bottom where I've added the gesso over the rippled papers, it's caused the gesso to be light and dark, so it's added additional texture. This part should also be enjoyable and relaxing. Don't worry too much that your gesso is too thick or too thin or not in the right spot. If you're not happy with it, while it's still wet, use a baby wipe to remove some, or if it's dried and you really, really hate it, stick another piece of collage on top and then try again. I will call this layer 3, and now we're going to dry that really well. Again, you can leave it to air dry. I'm just going to use my heat gun for speed of drying. Our next layer involves texture paste and the stencil. If you don't have a stencil, you don't have to do this part, but you could also make your own stencil. If you just take a piece of cardstock and your hole punch, just punch some holes in it randomly, as many or as few as you want, and then you could use that as your stencil. This stencil I'm using is from Marta from Maremi's Small Art. I will put the details of that in the description below. And I'm just going to do just in certain spots of the canvas with my texture paste. I'm not going to cover the whole canvas with this. We just want a little bit of interest in certain parts, and we want it to be balanced. So I want to do on the left, on the right, and at the bottom. I think that stenciling makes it look great. Remember to clean your stencil really well, because you can't get texture paste off really well once it's dry. And once we've dried this texture paste, we are now going to start adding our color. I'm using an acrylic paint. The color is called Sage. I'm using it directly out of the tube because I really like that color and I think it suits my theme. I'm adding some water to the color, and I want it to be watered down a little bit so it's more fluid and easier to spread on the canvas. But before I use it with the paintbrush, I'm going to add some of the acrylic paint directly onto the canvas from the tube, and then I'm going to use my palette knife to spread it out a little bit so it has a different kind of texture again. So it's the same color we'll be using, but applying it in a different method will give it a different look. This is a great way to experiment with the color as well, and if you think it's too bold or too much, again, just use a baby wipe to wipe all of it off, or some of it off, or to try and get the paint to move in a different direction. I think we're up to layer number 5 by now, and just make sure you're drying well between each layer. We're now going to add the watered down acrylic. If you don't have acrylic paints, you could also use watercolors for this step. Just make sure your acrylic paint is fluid enough to be able to run and flow. I add the paint to the edge of my canvas, in sort of like leaving droplets, and then I'm going to add water with my spray bottle and just allow the paint to run down. I will move the canvas around a bit, sort of left and right, just to help guide the paint a bit, but it's really going to do its own thing and move into the places it wants to move, leave some darker bits and some lighter bits. I love the droplets that it leaves. And what we will do once this part is dry, I'm going to dry it so that when I do the next section and I move the canvas, this part isn't still wet and the paint rolling around. As the paint dries, it is lighter, so I'm going to add additional paint to make it a little bit darker. I want a darker contrast. I'm going to cut out my focal point now. I'm not going to add it yet, but I want to just see where the placement will be so I can just see what else my background needs. Take your focal point and move it around your piece and just see where best you think it is suited. Originally in my mind I had wanted to put the focal point in the bottom right hand corner, but once I had put it onto the background and moved it around and just saw how everything flows, I decided in the end it was going to go in the middle of my page. It's not going to be adhered just yet. We're still working on the background, but it's a good idea just to see where your focal point is going to go. You can also have multiple focal points. You can have 2 if you like, or 3. Just make sure that they're balanced and that they work together. I'm going to carry on with adding the watered down acrylic in the green in the same way I did earlier. Keep building your layers of color. You could add multiple colors at this point if you wanted. I'm just sticking with the sage green because I really want a soft and misty kind of look. I don't want it too bold and bright, but of course you can add any colors you want, as many different colors as you want, depending on your style and your project. I'm now going to add some scribbles to my piece. I'm using some liquid paper, also known as Tipex or correctional fluid, and I'm just going to squeeze and draw and make little scribbles, sort of maybe resembling a little bit of writing, but it really doesn't say anything in specific. I'm just doing some scribbles. You could use a Posca pen if you have. I also have an acrylic marker, which doesn't really work great, to be honest, on this kind of background, but anything you have. This step is optional. If you don't have these things, you don't have to add it. I just like a few extra little details. The white acrylic marker that I have, the brand I have, like I said, isn't great for writing on mixed media, but it makes great splatter. So when I press it on a paper to get the paint to come to the tip, and if I shake it around, it really makes beautiful droplets. So I'm using it for that instead of writing. You could use watered down gesso or white acrylic paint to make your splatter. I will do a little bit of scribbling with the acrylic marker. Although it's not great, it's quite faint, but it adds a different dimension. So it's adding to the texture and the overall look. I'm not 100% happy with my scribbles at the top of the piece, so I'm going to add a little bit of acrylic paint with a palette knife and just see if I can change that look a little bit to something that I like. A bit more splatter. It's difficult to see in the video, but I'll try put some close-up photos of the piece and you can see the white splatter is actually quite effective. I'm going to be hanging up this finished piece on my wall, so I want to do the edge around the canvas so it's not just plain white. I'm just using the same acrylic paint again. I'm leaving this time a little bit thicker, and I'm just going to use my brush and just paint all the way around. I will do 2 coats because the paint is a little bit thin, but I'm just finishing off the edge of the canvas with just a simple paint. Just checking one last time where my focal point is going to go, and then I'm still happy to put it in the middle, and then I'm going to glue that down with some craft glue. I'm not going to use a hot glue at this stage because it's going to be a little bit too bulky and a glue stick would be not secure enough, so I'm just going to fill it with the PVA or craft glue, brush it all the way to the edges so everything can lie flat. It looks like I have a lot of glue, and there is quite a bit, but because my surface that I'm sticking it onto is not smooth, there's ridges and grooves, and we want the glue to get in between that so this can adhere well. I've put quite a bit. If any excess squeezes out when I press it down, you can just wipe that with a baby wipe. I tend to eyeball most of my placements, but for this one I'm just going to measure and make sure it's as centered as possible, because I think if this butterfly is off center on this piece, it really wouldn't look great and it will just put the whole piece off balance. The good thing about using the craft glue for your focal point is that the glue is a wet glue. It takes a while to dry, so you do have time to move it around and manipulate the pieces. I really hope you enjoyed this step-by-step tutorial, and I hope that you were inspired to create your own mixed media canvas. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate the time you take to watch my videos, to like, comment and share. I would really love it if you subscribed to my channel so you can see all my videos that are coming, and if you hit the little notification bell, you'll be notified every time I upload new content so you won't miss anything. Happy creating, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.